I'm Charlie Saunier from the Renegades of Puck, and this is the 20th Century Hockey Chronicle. Conn Smythe was a much-decorated World War I hero who later propelled the University of Toronto hockey clubs to championships in the early 1920s. It was in 1927, however, that he entered the public eye. On February the 14th of 1927, Smythe purchased NHL's Toronto St. Patrick's. As new post, Smythe would become one of the most powerful men in the National Hockey League over the next 30 years. Immediately after purchasing the Toronto team, Smythe changed its name to the Maple Leafs. It was too late to salvage the 1926-27 season. The Leafs were destined for the cellar, so Smythe turned his thoughts to long-term results. He created a 5-year plan that he thought would vault the Leafs to the top. Smythe traded for many players, including King Clancy, an Ottawa Senators defenseman who came to Toronto in 1930 via a racetrack bet. Apparently, Smythe's horse was running at Woodfine Racetrack with odds of 100-1 against. Yet Smythe put his bankroll on his horse and cheered him on an astonishing victory. With his winnings, he bought Clancy from Ottawa for $35,000 and threw in 2 extra players. Clancy turned out to be worth the hefty price. By the 1931-32 season, Smythe's Leafs were led by the kid line, comprised of right-wing Charlie Conacher, age 22, left-wing Busher Jackson, age 20, and center Joe Primo, age 25. The 3 youngsters dominated the league scoring charts, with Jackson finishing on top with 53 points, 28 of those points goals. Primo finished second in points and led the league in assists with 37, while Conacher placed 4th in scoring and tied for 1st in goals with 34. Complementing Smythe's splendid sextet was the continent's most spectacular new arena, Maple Leaf Gardens. Work on the Gardens began just 5 months before the start of the 31-32 season, but amazingly, it was completed by opening day. The arena immediately became to hockey what Yankee Stadium was to baseball. Toronto finished the 1931-32 season with a 23-18-7 record, placing second in the Canadian division. The Leafs entered the playoffs and met Chicago in a 2-game total goal series that opened in the Windy City. Behind Charlie Gardner's airtight goaltending, the Blackhawks stifled the Leafs 2-0 in Game 1. In the second game, however, Toronto blew out Chicago 6-0 and advanced to the semifinals, where they met the Montreal Maroons. Against the Maroons, the Leafs were again in trouble. They trailed Montreal 3-2 in Game 2 before Hap Day tied the score late in the third period. The Leafs' Bob Gracie then won the match in overtime, putting Toronto in the finals against the New York Rangers. The Leafs' kid line dominated New York in the finals. They swept the Rangers with the tennis-like scores of 6-4, 6-2, and 6-4, and skated off with the Stanley Cup. Smythe had said he needed 5 years to build a winner, and sure enough, 5 years is what it took. The Ottawa Senators, once a proud franchise, are forced to fold their tents for a season as dwindling attendance threatens financial doom. The Philadelphia Quakers, who suffered through a 4-36-4 season after transferring from Pittsburgh, disbanded prior to the season. The 8-team league continues its divisional format but extends the schedule to 48 games in an attempt to generate income. On January 19, 1932, Toronto's Charlie Conacher scores 5 goals against the Americans in an 11-3 drubbing. Toronto's Charlie Conacher ties the Rangers' Bill Cook for goal-scoring crown with 34. Leaf center Joe Primo leads the league in assists with 37, setting a new league record, finishes second overall in points with 50. Busher Jackson, the third member of Toronto's kid line, leads the league in scoring with 53 points. Montreal's flashy Howie Morenz finishes third in points, 24 goals, 25 assists for 49 points, and leads the Habs to a first-place finish in the Canadian division. He's awarded his 3rd Hart Trophy. Joe Primo cops the Lady Byng, thus ending Frank Boucher's 4-year stranglehold on the prize. Chicago's Charlie Gardner leads the NHL in goals against average at 1.92 and also wins the Vezina Trophy. 1 year after capturing the Vezina Trophy, Americans' goalie Roy Waters leads the league in losses with 20 as the Amerks fall to the Canadian division basement. The recipe for the breadline was written in the cold kitchens of the old Western Hockey League. That's where Bill Cook, Bun Cook, and Frank Boucher learned how to play the game. More often than not, the spotlight shone on Boucher, the playmaker of the trio. In 1931-32, however, it was Bill Cook who took the bows. He tied the league lead in goals with 34 and earned a spot on the first All-Star team. In 1931-32, the Maple Leafs reached the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time in their young history. Their opponents were the New York Rangers, matching the kid line against the bread line. Youth was served in this series as the Leafs, propelled by kidliner Charlie Conacher, sliced up the Rangers in 3 straight games. Conacher, who fired in a career-high 34 goals in the regular season, added 6 more timely markers in the playoffs. The Rangers win the American Division regular season title with a 23-17-8 record as the once powerful Bruins fall to last place. In the first round of the playoffs, Toronto and Chicago, the second-place finishers, meet and the Hawks win the first game 2-0. However, the Leafs win the series with a 6-0 victory in Game 2. In the battle of third-place teams, the Maroons outscore Detroit 3-1 in their two-game total goal series. The Rangers and Canadiens meet in a best-of-5 semifinal series. Montreal wins Game 1, but the Rangers take Game 2 in triple overtime. New York's Bun Cook scores with 28 seconds left in the sixth period for a 4-3 win. New York goalie John Roach shuts the Canadiens down in Game 3, 2-0. The Rangers earn a ticket to the finals with a 5-2 win in Game 4. Toronto wins its semifinal series with the Maroons thanks to an overtime goal in Game 2. The Leafs take momentum and confidence into the finals. The Rangers, apparently exhausted from their trials against Montreal, drop Game 1 of the finals 6-4 as Toronto's Busher Jackson scores a hat-trick. King Clancy scores twice for the Maple Leafs in Game 2 as the Rangers' defense fails again. Toronto wins 6-2. Despite two-goal performances by Frank Boucher and Bun Cook, the Rangers lose Game 3, again surrendering 6 goals to the powerful Toronto offense. The Maple Leafs thus win their third Stanley Cup. For the fourth straight Olympics, Canada takes the gold medal in hockey. The U.S. again takes home the silver. After his club's defeat in the 1932 Stanley Cup Finals, Rangers manager Lester Patrick made two key moves that eventually turned the Blue Shirts into champions again. First, he acquired Babe Siebert from the Montreal Maroons and put him on a line with Art Summers and Cecil Dillon. Secondly, he replaced goaltender John Ross Roach with Andy Aikenhead. Aikenhead said teammate Frank Boucher was an acrobatic young man who sometimes wore a tweed cap when he played goal. Of the original Rangers, the two most significant losses were goalie Lauren Chabot and defenseman Taffy Abel. Patrick traded Chabot after Lauren's eye injury in the 1928 playoffs, mistakenly believing that Chabot was puck-shy. Patrick discarded Abel because his weight was a problem. Despite the additions and subtractions, New York's 1928 championship nucleus was intact. Veterans Boucher, Bill and Bun Cook, Ching Johnson, and Murray Murdoch led the way. My philosophy for winning is simple, Patrick explained. I look for the leaders, then I let them lead. I give my last instructions in the dressing room just before the game, then I sit and let them think about whatever they like. The Cook-Boucher-Cook line continued to rank among the NHL's best. Bill, who tied for the league's lead in goals in 1931-32, captured the NHL scoring championship in 32-33. Bun and Boucher also finished among the league's top 10 scorers. In the playoffs, the Rangers knocked off both the Canadiens and the Red Wings and were set to meet Toronto again in the Stanley Cup Finals. Prior to the Stanley Cup Series, though, the Rangers got a break from an unexpected source, the Boston Bruins. A night before the finals were to begin, the Bruins and the Leafs played the final game in their series. Toronto won 1-0, but only after 4:46 of the sixth overtime period. The Leafs didn't reach their train until 3 a.m. and had to face New York the next night. We won the opener 5-1 and the Leafs never fully recovered, Boucher recalled. In addition to Aikenhead's world-class goaltending and the Rangers' balanced offense, the New Yorkers were fortified by an outstanding defensive core that included Johnson, Earl Siebert, Ott Heller, and Doug Brennan. They beat Toronto 3-1 in Game 2, lost Game 3 3-2, and battled Toronto to a 0-0 tie through regulation of Game 4. Near the 7:30 mark of Game 4's first overtime, the Rangers began a line change. Bun Cook skated to the bench and was replaced by Butch Keeling. Bill Cook and Boucher also were heading for the bench when Keeling suddenly fired a rink-wide pass to Bill Cook. Bill took the pass in full stride of the Toronto blue line along the right wing boards and cut quickly toward the goal, recalled Boucher. He could see a wide opening at Lauren Chabot's right as he moved in and fired for the hole. Cook beat the Leaf goalie at 7:33, giving the Rangers their second Stanley Cup in their 7-year history. Following a 1-year hiatus, the Ottawa Senators resume operation. The league mandates that if a goalie is called for a penalty, a teammate can serve the time for him. Prior to the start of the season, the NHL experiences another mini-strike when a salary cap is placed at $70,000 per team and $7,500 for the highest-paid player. NHL President Frank Calder receives permission by ownership to suspend the strikers, but he does not. Before the season begins, the protesters return to their teams. Player changes are prevalent. In one of the biggest moves, the Rangers sell star goalie John Roach to Detroit for $11,000. Boston goalie Tiny Thompson ties John Roach for the league lead in victories with 25 and also wins the goals against average race 1.83. The Bruins rebound from a last place finish in 1931-32 to finish atop the American Division. The Falcons, with Jack Adams at the helm, tie Boston 25-15-8. Toronto wins the hotly contested Canadian division with a record of 24-18-6. The Montreal Maroons finish in second. Ranger sniper Bill Cook leads the league in goals with 28 and points with 50. Ranger Frank Boucher wins the assist race with 28 and retakes the Lady Byng Trophy, his 5th overall. Busher Jackson, Toronto's gifted left winger, is 2nd overall in goals with 27 and points with 44. Baldy Northcutt leads the surprising Maroons in scoring, 22 goals, 21 assists for 43 total points. Howie Morenz, the Canadiens' 30-year-old legend, is beginning to fade, scoring just 14 goals in 46 games. Eddie Shore, unanimously viewed as the game's greatest backliner, earns the Hart Trophy. It's the first time a defenseman wins the coveted award. In 1932-33, Eddie Shore was hockey in Boston. He played every game like it was his last, and he set the pace for the style of the hockey in Beantown for years to come. The league's best rushing backliner terrorized enemy forwards as well as goalies, especially in the 1932-33 season when he notched a career-high 35 points. The league awarded Shore the Hart Trophy, his first of 4, making him the first blue liner to win the coveted silverware. The Bruins, thanks largely to Eddie Shore, give up the fewest goals, 88, earning Tiny Thompson the Vezina Trophy. The NHL comes out with its first Rookie of the Year award. However, it's still 4 years before the first Calder Trophy is introduced. Detroit's Carl Voss, a talented center who started the year with the Rangers, is named the NHL's first Rookie of the Year. In the playoff, Detroit beats the Maroons 5-2 in their 2-game total goal series. The Rangers edge the Canadiens 8-5. New York then knocks off Detroit in the semifinals. Toronto and Boston, winners of their respective divisions, play a thrilling 5-game series. 4 of the games go to overtime. Game 5 goes to a 6 overtime periods. On April 3, 1933, the Bruins and the Leafs play 164 minutes and 45 seconds of scoreless hockey. Toronto's Ken Durati beats Tiny Thompson at 4:46 of the 6th overtime. The finals are anticlimactic as Cecil Dillon and the Rangers easily handle the Leafs. New York prevails by scores of 5-1, 3-1, 2-3, and 1-0. Bill Cook's overtime goal in Game 4 wins the cup for New York. Cecil Dillon leads with 8 goals and 10 points. The United States wins the World Hockey Championship, ending Canada's string of 6 straight victories. Lionel Conacher could play a lacrosse game in the morning, tackle a football game before supper, and win a hockey game at night, and still be ready for a prize fight in the morning. Conacher was voted Canada's Athlete of the Half-Century. The Big Train skated in the NHL for 12 seasons, highlighted by a 28-point year for the Maroons in 1932-33. Later in life, he won a seat in the Canadian Parliament. After a subpar year, Tiny Thompson regained his goaltending crown in 1932-33 by leading all crease comps in wins with 25 and goals against average with 1.83 and shutouts with 11. On April 3, 1933, Thompson played the greatest game of his career in the decisive Game 5 of the Stanley Cup semifinals. Thompson stopped all comers for 164 minutes and 46 seconds before falling to Toronto in a painful 1-0 loss. It was the longest NHL game ever played at that point. The Depression was sinking its teeth into the NHL in 1932-33, causing league president Frank Calder some sleepless nights. In order to keep expenses down, Calder instituted a salary cap of $70,000 for each team, a move that angered players who protested with a brief strike before the season. Ottawa joined the league in 32-33, but the franchise would last only 2 years because of low funds. Although the Chicago Blackhawks had been members of the NHL since 1926, they had for the most part been an artistic failure. They hadn't won a Stanley Cup in their first 7 seasons. In 1932-33, they went 16, 20, and 12. The dismal trend was reversed in 1933-34 under the leadership of charismatic coach-manager Tommy Gorman and the goaltending of Charlie Gardner. The Hawks posted a 20-17-11 record, largely because they yielded the fewest goals in the league at 83. Gardner's goaltending had reached new degrees of perfection. He posted a stunning 1.73 goals against average and racked up 10 shutouts. In 14 other games, he permitted just 1 goal in each. But astute Gardner watchers perceived something unusual about the goalie's deportment. He had become intolerant of mistakes. Unknown to everyone, Gardner was suffering from a chronic tonsil infection that may have affected him emotionally. Winning the Stanley Cup became an obsession with him. Gardner's Hawks did make it to the Stanley Cup Finals. In the playoffs, they knocked off the Canadiens 4-3 in a total goal series and then beat the Maroons 6-2 in another total goals affair. That put Chicago in the finals against the favored Red Wings, whose firepower included Ebby Goodfellow, Larry Aury, and Cooney Wheeland. The best-of-5 series opened in Detroit, with the Blackhawks won the first game 2-1 in double overtime. In the second, also at Detroit's Olympia Stadium, the Hawks ran away with the game 4-1. As the team returned to Chicago for Game 3, the experts had conceded the Stanley Cup to the Blackhawks. But little did they know how bad Gardner was feeling. His body was racked with pain. Captain Lionel Conacher and Tommy Gorman realized they had a weary and tormented player. "He's bad," said Gorman, turning to Conacher in the dressing room before the teams took the ice. Gardner took command for the 2 periods, but when the final buzzer sounded, Detroit had won the game 5-2. "Look," Gardner said to all his depressed teammates, "all I want is 1 goal next game. Just 1 goal and I'll take care of the other guys." As he took his place in the goal crease on April 10, 1934, Gardner's body was already numb with fatigue, but for 2 periods the game remained scoreless. In the third, Detroit captured the momentum and seemed poised to break the 0-0 deadlock, but Gardner's flailing arms and jabbing legs held them at bay. Gardner weakened as the contest went through the first overtime and into the second. Despite his fatigue, the courageous goalie was true to his word. He held Detroit scoreless halfway through the second overtime. At the 10-minute mark, Chicago's Mush March moved into Detroit territory and unleashed a shot at Wilf Cutie. Before the goalkeeper could move, the puck sailed past him and the red light flashed. The Blackhawks had won their first Stanley Cup. Less than 2 months later, Gardner died in a Winnipeg hospital. To further enhance scoring, league mandates that only 3 players, including the goalie, may occupy the defensive zone. For the first time ever, visible time clocks are required in all of the NHL's arenas. The NHL changes its on-ice officiating format. 2 referees replace the 1 referee, 1 linesman system. The Detroit franchise, in serious financial straits, is purchased by James Norris Sr. Norris, a former amateur hockey star with Montreal's famed Winged Wheelers, renames his squad the Red Wings. The Red Wings' top line of Cooney Whelan, centering Herbie Lewis and Larry Ori, leads the team to their best season ever. They win the American Division for the first time. Detroit's John Sorrell nets 21 goals. That ties him for 4th in the league with Boston's Nels Stewart. The Maple Leafs and Canadiens strike a blockbuster deal. Goalie George Hainsworth goes to Toronto while puck stopper Lauren Chabot heads to Montreal. The Maple Leafs win the Canadian Division with a record of 26-13-9. The Canadiens finish second, 11 points back. The Blackhawks give up the fewest goals, earning Charlie Gardner his 2nd Vezina trophy in what will be his last NHL season. The Rangers, the defending Stanley Cup champions, fall to 3rd place, though Cecil Dillon ties for 4th in scoring with 39 points. Boston's Marty Barry finishes 2nd in goals with 27 for the last place Bruins and ties Rangers' Cecil Dillon for 4th overall in scoring with 39. As the right winger for the most famous line in hockey, the Kid Line, Toronto's Charlie Conacher was the most feared shooter in the NHL. In 1933-34, leading the league in both goals with 32 and points with 52, the Big Bomber made the first All-Star team and the first of 3 consecutive years. However, despite scoring 5 points in the Cup semifinal games, Conacher couldn't carry the Leafs past the Red Wings, who nipped Toronto 3-2. King Clancy was an institution at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. The affable Irishman was more than just a joker. He was a superstar among some of the greatest ever to play. The Leafs he played with in 1933-34 included the Kid Line, Jackson Primo, and Conacher, as well as Hap Day, Ace Bailey, and goalie George Hainsworth. Clancy's 28 points led all NHL defensemen, and the Leafs finished first in the Canadian Division. On December 12, 1933, the NHL was shaken when Toronto star Ace Bailey was nearly killed after a vicious check from behind by Bruins defenseman Eddie Shore, who mistakenly thought Bailey had tripped him. Bailey suffered a fractured skull and was close to death for 2 weeks. Although Bailey survived, he never played hockey again. Shore was slapped with a suspension while the league staged a benefit game for Bailey and his family. Matt Barry played center for the last-place Boston Bruins in 1933-34. A Quebec City boy, Barry had been playing in the NHL since 1927 and always scored his share of goals. In 1933-34, he outscored team leaders Nels Stewart and Dick Clapper, chalking up 27 goals, 2nd overall in the league, and a dozen assists for 39 points. This was his best season to date. He would continue to post big numbers for the remainder of the decade. With 52 points in 42 games, Leafs right winger Charlie Conacher wins his first NHL scoring title. He also grabs his 3rd goal-scoring title with 32 in 4 years. Toronto's King Clancy emerges as the NHL's most productive defenseman with 28 points. Red Horner, Toronto's tough defenseman, is the most penalized player, 146 minutes. Chicago's Lionel Conacher finishes a distant 2nd with 87. Chicago's Charlie Gardner tops the league in shutouts with 10. Toronto's George Hainsworth leads the league in victories with 26. On December 12, 1933, Boston's Eddie Shore nearly kills Toronto star Ace Bailey in a vicious, unprovoked attack. Shore blindsides Bailey, who flips backward and lands on his head. For 2 weeks, Ace Bailey hovers near death after his attack by Eddie Shore, who is suspended by the league. Bailey will recover from his head injury, but will never play again. On February 14, 1934, the league stages its first All-Star game between Toronto and an NHL All-Star team. As a fundraiser for Ace Bailey, Toronto wins 7-3. In the playoffs, the American Division second-place Blackhawks take on the Canadian Division second-place Canadiens. Chicago wins 4-3 on total goals. The third-place finishers, New York Rangers and Montreal Maroons, play to a 0-0 tie in Game 1 before Montreal prevails in the deciding game 2-1. The Blackhawks meet the Maroons in the semifinals. The Hawks prevail 6-2 in a two-game total goal series. The Maple Leafs and the Red Wings face each other in the best-of-5 semifinals. Detroit wins Game 1 in OT 2-1, then trounces the Leafs 6-3 in the second game. The Maple Leafs, with their backs to the wall, tie the semifinal series with wins in Games 3 and Game 4, outscoring the Wings 8-2 in the process. The Red Wings hold Toronto's kid line, Busher Jackson, Joe Primo, and Charlie Conacher, in check to win Game 5 by a score of 1-0. Chicago nips Detroit 2-1 in Game 1 of the finals as Paul Thompson scores in double overtime. Chicago wins Game 2 of the finals 4-1, but Detroit wins Game 3 5-2. Game 4 remains scoreless until 10:05 of double overtime when Mush March scores for the Hawks to give them their first Stanley Cup. Charlie Gardner, Chicago's brilliant goaltender, has a 1.50 playoff goals against average. Russ Blinko of the Maroons is named Rookie of the Year. Frank Boucher, the Rangers' leading scorer, wins his 6th Lady Byng trophy in 7 seasons. 2 months after winning the Stanley Cup, Chicago goalie Charlie Gardner dies of a brain hemorrhage at age 29. After years of playing second division hockey, the Detroit franchise got a needed infusion of cash and hockey know-how when James Norris purchased the team in 1933. Norris had played with Montreal's AAA team, long known as the Winged Wheelers. To this day, the Detroit Red Wings carry the emblem of the winged wheel on their chests. The 1933-34 team motored its way to first-place finish in the American Division with a 24-14-10 record. Goaltender Charlie Gardner may have carried the Blackhawks in the 1934 Stanley Cup, but credit right winger Mush March with a big assist. March was not only a big scorer, but his consistent hard work and his playmaking ability kept the Hawks within range as they finished second in the American Division. Marsh was also a hero of the playoffs, whacking home the cup-winning goal at 10:50 of double overtime in the 4th game of the final game. They call Gordie Howe Mr. Hockey. If one were looking around NHL boardrooms for candidates for the title, the name James Norris would be near the top of the list. Norris bought the NHL's Detroit Falcons in 1932, renamed them the Red Wings, and owned the team until his death in 1952. At one time, Norris and his family controlled Detroit's Olympia Stadium, Chicago's Stadium, and New York's Madison Square Garden. The Maple Leafs took the express track through the 1933-34 season, winning a league-high 26 games and scoring 57 more goals than any other team. Once again, Charlie Conacher led the way with 32 goals, while linemate gentleman Joe Primo paced the loop with 32 helpers. Despite all their firepower, the Leafs lost a 5-game struggle with the Red Wings in the semifinals and limped home to Hogtown without Lord Stanley's vaunted mug. In the bilingual metropolis of Montreal, it was perfectly natural for both the French and English-speaking natives to each have a team of their own. Les Canadiens were first representing the Francophones in 1924. Businessman Jimmy Strachan organized a team for the English rooters and called them the Maroons. The Maroons-Canadiens rivalry was intense, with the Forum rocking every time the English and French teams clashed. The Maroons won the Stanley Cup in 1926 and remained one of the NHL's most competitive teams for the next few years, although they didn't win another cup. In 1934-35, however, manager Tommy Gorman blended a group of first-class veterans with standout youngsters, and it turned out to be a wonderful mix. Veteran Lionel Conacher, who had helped the body check the Chicago Blackhawks to the 1934 Stanley Cup, was acquired by Montreal a few months later. Conacher anchored the rock-solid defense that included Shrew Evans, Alan Shields, and Cy Wentworth. Behind them was Alex Connell, a 10-year veteran who had previously starred for Ottawa, Detroit, and Ottawa again. Scoring was well distributed among such solid forwards as Baldy Northcutt, Herb Kane, Bob Gracie, Russ Blinko, and Earl Robinson, who led the team with 35 points. Nobody on the Maroons finished among the league's top 10, however. The Maroons played tough hockey and occasionally were involved in tumultuous games. On January 22, 1935, they clashed with the Bruins at Boston Garden. A near riot erupted after Boston's Eddie Shore flattened Montreal's Jimmy Ward, who was hospitalized with a severe concussion. Lionel Conacher knocked out Boston's Nell Stewart with a punch later in that game, and Conacher became involved in a battle with several Bruins fans. In another game, the New York Americans' Red Dutton used his stick to whack the hand of Maroons' Hooley Smith. Dutton skated to the Montreal bench and apologized, but Smith responded by knocking out Dutton with a left hook. Although they finished second in the Canadian division in 34-35, the Maroons gelled at playoff time. In the opening round, Connell played some of the best goal of his life, shutting out defending champion Chicago in 2 straight games. The Maroons then disposed of the Rangers in 2 games and reached the finals against the Leafs. The Torontonians never stood a chance. The Maroons nipped them 3-2 in Game 1 on Dave Trotier's overtime goal and then shredded the Leafs 3-1 and 4-1 to win their second Stanley Cup. Nobody knew it at the time, but the championship marked the beginning of the end for the proud Montreal franchise. The Great Depression was wrecking the Canadian economy, and both Canadians and Maroons were suffering at the gate. The Maroons remained strong the following 2 seasons, but they plummeted to the cellar in 37-38. The Maroons folded in the summer of 1938, ending a brief but glorious life in the NHL. The NHL adopts the use of a penalty shot awarded to any player who is tripped and prevented from a clear shot on goal. The penalty shot is to be taken from within a 10-foot circle, 38 feet from the goal. The struggling Ottawa franchise, strapped for financing, transfers to St. Louis, the team's new name, the St. Louis Eagles. The Cup-defending Blackhawks fire manager coach Tommy Gorman, who takes over for the Maroons. Alex Connell, the former star goalie for Ottawa, who sat out the 33-34 season, takes over puck-stopping chores for the Maroons. The Toronto Maple Leafs, still powered by the Kid Line, win the Canadian division by 9 points over the Maroons. Charlie Conacher, the Leafs' talented left winger, wins his second straight scoring title with 57 points. A new star is on the horizon as Detroit's Sid Howe finishes second in total points with 47. Detroit's Larry Orey, the playoff scoring leader the previous year, is right behind teammate Sid Howe with 46 points. The Americans Art Chapman and the Rangers' Frank Boucher top the NHL charts in assists with 34 and 32, respectively. Rangers sniper Cecil Dillon is second in the NHL in goals as he powers in 25. Although the Maroons were crowned Cup champions in 34-35, their franchise was on its last legs. Shortly after NHL President Frank Calder presented the ball to GM Tommy Gorman, it became clear that Montreal could not support 2 hockey teams. The Maroons survived for 3 more years on the ice, but the league kept the franchise on the books for the next 12 years, hoping against hope that they would find a wealthy backer to buy the team. Toronto's Red Horner leads the league in penalty minutes with 125. Scottish-born scrapper Irv Frew, 5'9" defenseman for St. Louis, is second in penalty minutes with 89. The Boston Bruins rebound from a last-place finish in 33-34 to capture the American Division title. They finish a point ahead of Chicago. Marty Berry leads the Bruins in balanced attack, notching 20 goals and 40 points. Boston's Eddie Shore, a year after nearly killing Toronto's Ace Bailey, is the highest-scoring defenseman in the league with 33 points. The defending champion Blackhawks play the tightest defense, allowing just 88 goals in 48 games. Chicago's Lauren Chabot tops the league in goals against average with a 1.83 mark. Maroons goalie Alex Connell, a veteran of 11 NHL seasons, finishes with 9 shutouts and the second-best goals against average at 1.92. Maple Leafs goalie George Hainsworth again leads the NHL in victories with 30. In Chicago, the sad demise of Howie Morenz is evident in his production, 8 goals in just 48 games. Detroit defenseman Ralph Scotty Bowman records his first ever successful penalty shot as he beats the Maroons' Alex Connell. St. Louis boss Eddie Girard is fired after 13 games, replaced by former NHL star George Boucher. On November 20, 1934, Toronto's Busher Jackson scores 4 third-period goals as the Leafs beat St. Louis 5-2. The NHL's bad boy of the 1930s was Toronto's Red Horner, who won the third of his 8 straight penalty crowns in 1934-35. As a youth, Horner delivered the news as Conn Smythe's paperboy, and he constantly begged the Leafs manager for a tryout. Smythe gave him a spot with the farm club, and Horner soon made the jump to the big club. His job was to keep opponents from crossing into the Leaf zone, and he handled the task with authority. The NHL had a new look for the 1934-35 season. One of the league's proudest franchises, the Ottawa Senators, collapsed under the burden of the Depression. The franchise was transferred to St. Louis for 34-35 and was called the Eagles. Frank Finnegan, Joe Lamb, Bill Cowley, and Carl Voss were among the stars who flew for the Eagles, but they finished 11-31-6 and folded themselves after the season. It's often said that such-and-such hockey player wins a trophy, but in reality, he only has his name inscribed on the award. He doesn't get to keep it. Frank Boucher, however, won the Lady Byng Trophy so many times, copping number 7 in 1935, that the NHL decided to just give him the darn thing. They forged a new Lady Byng Trophy the following year. The 1934-35 season marked the last time the Cook-Boucher-Cook line would be a dominant force. In the opening round of the playoffs, the Blackhawks meet the Maroons and the Rangers face the Canadians. The The Blackhawks are held scoreless by Alex Connell over 2 games as the Maroons win 1-0 on Baldy Northcutt's OT goal in Game 2. The Rangers win a 6-5 total goal shootout, winning 2-1 and tying 4-4 to advance past the Habs. In Game 1 of their semifinal matchups, the Maroons beat the Rangers 2-1. The teams skate to a 3-3 tie in Game 2, meaning the Maroons win the total goal series 5-4. Toronto and Boston, as division champs, play a best-of-5 series. The Leafs dominate the Bruins, winning 3-1. In Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals, the Maroons win 3-2 thanks to an overtime goal by Dave Trottier. Montreal's Russ Blinko scores the game winner in Game 2 as the Maroons top the Leafs 3-1. The Maroons take Game 3 4-1 to sweep the Maple Leafs and win their last Stanley Cup. Baldy Northcutt, the leading playoff scorer, scores the game-winning goal. In postseason awards, the NHL honors New York American winger Dave Sweeney Shriner 40 points as its Rookie of the Year. Chicago goalie Lauren Chabot, in his first year with the Hawks, wins the Vezina Trophy. New York Ranger center Frank Boucher is presented with the Lady Byng Trophy for the 7th time. The NHL actually gives him the trophy to keep. Despite his reputation and mean streak, Boston's Eddie Shore is awarded his 2nd Hart Trophy. Nothing in sports can match the heart-thumping excitement of overtime hockey, as every rush, every shot can mean sudden death for one team, sudden victory for another. The greatest nail-biter of all time took place on March 24, 1936 at the Montreal Forum. It was the first game of the semifinals matchup between the hosting Maroons and the visiting Detroit Red Wings. Led by Hooley, Smith, Baldy, Northcutt, and Jimmy Ward, the Maroons presented one of the most formidable attacks in the league. Detroit, however, was also strong up front. The Red Wings' first line of Marty Barry, Herbie Lewis, and Larry Orey was enjoying a splendid season, with Barry winning the scoring championship in the American Division. Despite the notable scores on both teams, 3 periods of play elapsed without either club scoring a goal. This meant sudden death overtime. The first team to score would win the game. Since both teams were getting strong goaltending, there was reason to suspect that the overtime might take a while. But it lasted more than just a while. It took pretty much all night. The respective goaltenders, Norm Smith for Detroit and Lauren Chabot for the Maroons, brilliantly repulsed all shots through 5 consecutive sudden death periods. 4 minutes and 46 seconds after the 9th overall period began, the teams broke the NHL record for the longest game set by Toronto and Boston in 1933. Still well into the 6th sudden death overtime session of this game, there was no end in sight. The veterans of both teams were fatigued beyond recovery. It was essential to employ the players with the most stamina, and naturally, those with even a smidgen of energy remaining were the little-used younger skaters. One of them was Mud Brunto, who a season earlier had played for the Wings minor league team. During a 35-36 regular season, he had mustered only 2 points. At age 21, he was the youngest man in the longest game. Red Wings coach Jack Adams believed that Brunto now had the most energy left. At 2:25 a.m., said Adams, I looked along the bench for the strongest legs, and I scrambled the lines to send out Sid Howe, Heck Kilray, and Bruntow. Just after the 16th minute of the 6th overtime, Bruntow surrounded the puck in the Detroit zone, passed it to Kilray. They challenged the Montreal defense, Kilray faking a return pass and then sliding it across the blue line. Bruntow cut behind the Detroit defense, retrieved the puck, and fired it past the falling Chabot. The puck struck the twine and didn't even fall to the ice. There was a dispute when the goal judge neglected to flash his red light, but referee Nell Stewart arbitrated. You're bloody right, it's a goal, Stewart announced, and put up his hand as a signal. After a complete game in 116 minutes and 30 seconds of overtime, the Detroit Red Wings had defeated the Montreal Maroons 1-0. The league loses one team, the St. Louis Eagles, due to financial difficulties. Eagles players are dispersed around the league. The Bruins pluck budding superstar Bill Cowley from the Eagles, while the Americans salvage Carl Voss. Bill Beveridge, last year's NHL loss leader with 31 with St. Louis, takes over for Maroons goalie Lauren Chabot. Detroit prevails in the American Division with a 24-16-8 record. The other 3 teams in the division, Boston, Chicago, and the Rangers, each finish 6 points behind. The Maroons, with a record of 22-16-10, take the Canadian Division, edging Toronto by 2 points. The Canadians finish the season at 11-26-11. Their horrible record brings an NHL ruling granting the Habs first rights to all French-Canadian players for 3 years. 6 of the NHL teams finish with winning records as the Canadians and Americans absorb the losses. New York American Sweeney Shriner wins the scoring title, 45 points in just his 2nd NHL season. Charlie Conacher, replaced on Toronto's top line by Tiny Pep Kelly, still ties for the NHL lead in goals with 23. Leaf center Billy Toms also knocks home 23. Art Chapman, who centers Sweeney Shriner's line for the Americans, tops the charts with 28 assists. Detroit's Marty Barry, traded by Boston for Cooney Weiland, finishes 2nd in the league in total points with 40. Goalie Norm Smith, a former Maroons starter, leads the Red Wings with his NHL best 24 wins. The Maroons' Baldy Northcutt, Hooley Smith, and Jimmy Ward finished with 105 points for the Canadian Division champs. Toronto tough guy Red Horner sets an NHL record with 167 penalty minutes. Blackhawk Paul Thompson ties Detroit's Marty Berry for second overall in points with 40. The Maple Leafs offense leads the NHL in goals with 126. Boston's defense, led by Eddie Shore and goaltender Tiny Thompson, allowed just 83 goals. Tiny Thompson leads the league in goals against with 1.71 and shutouts total of 10. Thompson becomes the first goalie to record an assist when Babe Siebert converts his pass into a goal. Boston's Babe Siebert and the Americans' Joe Jura top all NHL backliners with 21 goals. Howie Morenz joins another team, the Rangers. The opening round of the playoffs features a shutout between Toronto and Boston. The Leafs take the two-game total goal series 8-6 after losing 3-0 in Game 1. The New York Americans win their total goal series against the Blackhawks 7-5 thanks to a 3-0 victory in Game 1. The respective division champs, the Red Wings and Maroons, play a best-of-5 series. The longest game in history unfolds in Game 1, which goes to 16:30 of the sixth overtime. Red Wing rookie Mud Bruntow wins the NHL's longest game as he beats the Maroons' Lauren Chabot. Detroit's Norm Smith skates off with a 1-0 shutout in the marathon game. He plays 176 minutes and 30 seconds without allowing a goal. Norm Smith shines again in Game 2, beating the Maroons 3-0. His 248 minutes of shutout hockey is an all-time playoff record. Detroit goes to the finals for the second time after beating the Maroons 2-1 in Game 3. In the other semifinal, the Leafs beat the Americans in 3 games. Detroit soars past Toronto in the first 2 games of the finals. The Wings win 3-1 in Game 1 and 9-4 in Game 2. The courageous Maple Leafs beat Detroit 4-3 in Game 3 as Buzz Bowl scores in overtime. The Wings claim Game 4 of the finals 3-2 as Pete Kelly scores the game-winning goal. Detroit thus wins its first ever Stanley Cup. Toronto has 3 players atop the playoff scoring chart: Buzz Bowl, Billy Thomas, and Joe Primo. Johnny Sorrell's 7 playoff points lead Detroit. Though his Blackhawks are first-round playoff losers, Chicago goalie Mike Karakas is named NHL's Rookie of the Year. Doc Rom, the slick playmaker for Chicago, wins the Lady Byng Trophy. Boston's Eddie Shore wins his 3rd Hart Trophy in 4 years. The Bruins' Tiny Thompson captures the Vezina, his 3rd. Great Britain wins its first and only Olympic gold medal in ice hockey. After 4 straight golds, Canada settles for the silver. Once the darling of the Montreal Canadiens, Howie Morenz began to lose favor in the Forum in 1933-34 when his speed and points were on the decline. Morenz, an aging 32, was traded to Chicago at the end of the year, and for the next 2 seasons he struggled with the Blackhawks and the New York Rangers. New York Lester Patrick was happy to return him to the Canadiens for the 1936-37 season. Wearing the Canadiens jersey again proved to be a tonic for Morenz. True, he had lost some of his old getaway power, but he was reunited with his old line mates, and every so often he'd bring the Forum crowd to its feet with an exquisite Morenz rush. He was doing just that on the night of January 28, 1937 at the Forum when Chicago defenseman Earl Siebert body-checked him, sending Morenz hurtling feet first into the end boards. It wasn't a normal spill. When his skate rammed into the wood, a snap could be heard around the rink, and Morenz crumpled in excruciating pain. The crowd leaped to its feet in fear. Howie was rushed to the hospital with a badly broken leg, and many speculated whether he would ever return to play again. Once in the hospital, the 34-year-old Morenz began brooding about his fate. Instead of recuperating, he suffered a nervous breakdown. Then he developed heart trouble. Nobody is quite sure what transpired in that hospital to bring about the utter deterioration of Howie's condition. One theory has it that he was overwhelmed by friends who filled the room with flowers, books, and candy. The hospital, said one visitor, looked like Times Square on a Saturday night. The continual stream of visitors tired him. Perhaps too late, hospital officials forbade all but Howie's immediate family from visiting him. Then early, on March 8, 1937, Morenz was given a complete checkup, and it appeared as though he was rallying. It was a deceptive analysis. A few hours later, Howard William Morenz was dead. The funeral service for Morenz was held at center ice of the Forum, where thousands filed silently past his coffin. Montreal journalist Andy O'Brien of Weekend Magazine was there at the time and recalled the scene. Outside, said O'Brien, the crowd was so great, we of the press had to enter through the boiler room. As I walked below the north end, profound silence left an impression of emptiness. The rink was jammed to the rafters with fans standing motionless with heads bared. The NHL paid tribute to Morenz on November 2, 1937 by sanctioning an all-star game at the Forum. The game pitted the Canadians and the Maroons against the Blue Ribbon NHL squad, with the All-Stars winning 6-5 and the proceeds given to the Morenz family. Howie's uniform was presented to his son, Howie Morenz Jr., who would eventually become a professional hockey player, just like his father. I'm Charlie Sonnier from the Renegades of Puck, and this has been the 20th Century Hockey Chronicle. If you'd like to support more projects like this, please follow the Renegades of Puck on all social media platforms and also visit renegadesofpuck.com.